She had it all: beauty, fame, the perfect Hollywood marriage. And then, overnight, it was gone. Nicole Kidman's dream life with Tom Cruise shattered. Her children slipped from her embrace, and she disappeared into a darkness no one dared to question. The truth she never spoke is far more devastating than anyone imagined. Long before Hollywood knew her name, Nicole Mary Kidman was just a shy, red-haired girl growing up in Sydney, Australia. Her father, Anthony, was a respected psychologist, and her mother, Janelle, was a nurse and teacher, two intellectuals who raised their children with discipline and curiosity. Nicole wasn't the type of child who commanded attention. Instead, she buried herself in books, daydreamed endlessly, and retreated into a world of imagination that only she could control. Yet even then, people noticed something unusual about her. At school, while other children ran freely on the playground, Nicole often preferred to hide backstage, watching rehearsals, studying gestures and voices with a quiet intensity. She was painfully self-conscious about her pale skin and tall frame, often teased for looking different. The shyness sometimes overwhelmed her, but it also fueled a longing to escape into other characters. Theater became her refuge, the one place where she could shed her awkwardness and transform into someone new. When she was just a teenager, Nicole joined a local drama program, and the change was startling. The timid girl who once avoided the spotlight suddenly commanded it. Teachers saw a raw power in her performance, an ability to project vulnerability and strength at the same time. This discovery ignited something inside her. Acting wasn't just a pastime, it was her salvation. It gave her the freedom to express the feelings she often kept locked away. By the time she turned 16, Nicole was already earning small roles on Australian television. But behind the early success, she still carried the heart of a lonely, introverted girl, longing for connection. No one could have guessed that the same fragility would one day become her greatest strength on screen and her deepest wound in life. Nicole's first real steps into acting were modest, but they carried the weight of destiny. At just 16, she made her film debut in Bush Christmas, 1983, a small Australian holiday movie. It wasn't glamorous, and the production barely registered outside the country, but Nicole's natural screen presence couldn't be ignored. Audiences saw a teenager with luminous skin, piercing blue eyes, and an intensity that lingered long after the credits rolled. Soon after, she appeared in BMX Bandits, a low-budget teen adventure film that unexpectedly became a cult hit overseas. The movie didn't make her a star, but it gave her something more important: confidence. Nicole realized that she could hold a camera's gaze, that she belonged in front of the lens. For a girl who had once shrunk away from attention, this was nothing short of a revelation. But her early journey wasn't without hardship. While she pursued acting, her mother was diagnosed with breast cancer. Nicole, still just a teenager, stepped away from the spotlight to care for her. It was a formative moment, learning sacrifice, resilience, and how quickly life could shift from bright to devastating. The experience left a mark on her, deepening her sensitivity and emotional depth, qualities that would later bleed into her performances. By the late 1982nd, Nicole was balancing school, caring for her family, and auditioning for roles across Australia. Her drive was relentless, and she quickly gained a reputation as one of the country's most promising young actresses. She was no longer the shy girl hiding behind the curtain. Nicole Kidman was stepping into the light, determined to carve out a place for herself, even if it meant leaving everything familiar behind. Hollywood came calling in 1989, and with it came the encounter that would change Nicole's life forever. After her performance in the psychological thriller Dead Calm, critics hailed her as a breakout talent, praising her poise and intensity well beyond her years. The film traveled far beyond Australia, catching the eye of Hollywood's most bankable star at the time, Tom Cruise. Tom was preparing to shoot Days of Thunder, a high-octane racing drama, and he was searching for a co-star who could match his energy on screen. When he saw Nicole's work, he was immediately intrigued. She was beautiful, yes, But it wasn't just that she carried a vulnerability that seemed to shimmer beneath her strength. For Tom, she wasn't just another actress. She was someone who could elevate him. On set, sparks flew instantly. Tom, already a global phenomenon, was magnetic, used to commanding every room he entered. Nicole, still new to Hollywood, was disarmed by his charm and captivated by his confidence. For a young woman barely in her 20s, it felt like stepping into a fairy tale, one where the most powerful man in the industry had chosen her. But beneath the dazzling chemistry, there was also imbalance. Nicole was starstruck, eager to prove herself, while Tom was already living at the top of the mountain. Their romance burned quickly, fueled by passion and the intoxicating allure of fame. The tabloids dubbed them Hollywood's golden couple, the perfect match of beauty and power. Yet few understood the cost Nicole would pay for stepping into Tom's world. That meeting on Days of Thunder didn't just launch Nicole into international stardom, it sealed her fate in ways she couldn't yet comprehend. The path ahead would bring her unimaginable highs, but also the kind of devastation no one could see coming. By December 1990, the whirlwind had swept them both off their feet. Tom Cruise, Hollywood's reigning superstar, and Nicole Kidman, the luminous newcomer, stood before friends and family in a private ceremony in Telluride, Colorado. The wedding wasn't just a union of two people, it was a spectacle, the merging of raw youth and established power. To the outside world, it looked like the perfect love story. The golden boy of Hollywood and the stunning young actress from Australia, united in what seemed like destiny. Nicole was just 23. Still wide-eyed, she believed she had found her forever. Tom was already a seasoned veteran of fame, carrying the weight of being one of the most bankable names in cinema. Their marriage instantly elevated her status. Overnight, Nicole went from promising actress to Hollywood royalty, her every move chronicled by tabloids that breathlessly followed Mr. and Mrs. Cruise. But beneath the glitter, the dynamic was clear. Tom's star power eclipsed everything, and Nicole became defined as Tom Cruise's wife, rather than as an artist in her own right. The media painted them as inseparable, but insiders whispered that the balance of power tilted sharply toward Tom. He was the seasoned giant. She, the ingenue, swept into his orbit. And yet, Nicole leaned into the fantasy. For a girl who had once been painfully shy, this fairy tale offered validation, security, and the illusion of control. She spoke in interviews about being in love, about wanting a family, about how Tom made her feel protected. What she didn't yet realize was that protection could come at a cost: her independence, her identity, even her voice. The wedding photos told one story, a radiant bride in love with her superstar husband. But behind the smiles, Nicole was already stepping into a shadow. The dream life she thought she had built would soon reveal cracks that no fairy tale ending could fix. Almost as quickly as the wedding bells faded, Nicole and Tom began building the family they both claimed to crave. But when Nicole suffered the agony of an ectopic pregnancy and subsequent miscarriage early in their marriage, her world collapsed. The young bride, barely in her 20s, discovered she might never have biological children. It was a private tragedy, one the world never saw, but it left a wound that never fully healed. In the aftermath, Tom suggested adoption. To Nicole, it felt like salvation. They welcomed Isabella in 1992 and Connor in 1995, two children she loved with a ferocity that astonished even her closest friends. Nicole doted on them, building her life around motherhood with the devotion of someone who had once feared she'd never hear a child call her mom. But with this joy came something more insidious: the deepening influence of Scientology. Tom, already one of the church's most famous members, insisted their children be raised in the faith. Nicole, raised Catholic and deeply private, found herself on unfamiliar ground. She never openly criticized Scientology, but those close to her said she often felt like an outsider in her own family. The church became a constant presence. Decisions about the children, about their education, even about who was allowed near them, were all filtered through its rigid doctrines. Still, Nicole played her role, smiling for photographs, presenting the image of a perfect young mother. But behind the serene facade, cracks were already forming. She adored her children, but felt increasingly uneasy about the invisible walls being built around them. The more Tom leaned into Scientology, the more Nicole felt pushed to the margins. Motherhood had given her immense joy, but it had also tethered her even more tightly to a world she didn't fully understand, and one that would later turn on her with devastating consequences. While Nicole was navigating the complexities of marriage and motherhood, her career began to soar in ways even she hadn't dared to imagine. For years, she had been seen primarily as Tom Cruise's wife, her own talent often overshadowed by his colossal fame. But in the late 1992 and early 2002, everything began to shift. Her collaboration with director Baz Luhrmann on Moulin Rouge, 2001, was nothing short of transformative. As Satine, the dazzling courtesan with a doomed fate, Nicole brought a mix of fragility, sensuality, and raw emotional power that critics hailed as the performance of her career. She sang, she danced, she embodied heartbreak with a conviction that left audiences stunned. The film was a global hit, reinvigorating the musical genre and catapulting her into the stratosphere of Hollywood's elite. For Nicole, it was more than just a role, it was vindication. After years of being introduced as Tom Cruise's wife, she was finally being recognized as Nicole Kidman, an actress of formidable talent. The Oscar nomination that followed felt like a public declaration. She could stand on her own, and she didn't stop there. With The Others, 2001, a chilling psychological thriller, she proved her range yet again, commanding the screen with quiet intensity. Hollywood no longer doubted her. Nicole had arrived as one of the greats, but with the triumph came a strange irony. The brighter she shone in her career, the darker her personal life seemed to grow. The more acclaim she received, the more unstable her marriage became. As Nicole basked in critical praise, the foundations of her family life were quietly eroding. And soon, the applause would no longer be enough to drown out the sound of her world collapsing. As Nicole's star rose higher, the cracks in her marriage to Tom Cruise grew impossible to ignore. Outwardly, they remained Hollywood's golden couple, two glamorous figures appearing arm in arm at premieres, smiling for photographers. But behind closed doors, the balance of power was shifting, and Nicole increasingly found herself under the weight of Tom's control. Tom was not just a husband, he was one of the most powerful men in the industry, and he was deeply enmeshed in Scientology. The church wasn't merely a belief system for him, it was a central force that guided nearly every decision. For Nicole, raised in a conventional Catholic household, the doctrines and demands of Scientology were alien, even unsettling. She never fully embraced it, and those close to the couple whispered that her reluctance created tension not only in the marriage, but also with the church itself. Tom's devotion, however, only deepened. As his involvement intensified, Scientology leaders viewed Nicole as a potential threat, someone who might pull him away from their influence. It was a dangerous position to be in, and Nicole felt it. Decisions about their children, their schedules, even their friendships, seemed less and less like private choices and more like matters overseen by the church. At home, the imbalance was clear. Nicole adored her children, clung to them as her anchor, but she could feel herself being sidelined in her own family. Tom's charisma, his authority, his certainty, all of it loomed over her. The shy girl from Sydney had grown into a global star, yet inside her own marriage, she felt small, silenced, and increasingly isolated. The world still saw perfection, the glamorous couple with two beautiful children, living the ultimate Hollywood dream. But Nicole could sense the storm gathering. Every smile she forced in public was a cover for the private truth, that her marriage was becoming a gilded cage, and the walls of Scientology were closing in around her. It happened without warning, at least for Nicole. In early 2001, just days after celebrating their 10th wedding anniversary, Tom Cruise announced that their marriage was over. For the world, it was shocking. The couple, who had once epitomized Hollywood romance, suddenly unraveling before the cameras. But for Nicole, it was more than shocking. It was devastating. She later admitted she had been blindsided. One moment she believed they were working through their struggles. The next, she was cast adrift. Tom filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences. But the details were shrouded in secrecy. Rumors swirled endlessly that Scientology had pushed for the split, that Nicole's resistance to the church had finally marked her as an outsider, that Tom had grown restless in a marriage where the spotlight was no longer his alone. The media frenzy was relentless. Nicole, gaunt and fragile, was photographed leaving her lawyer's office, visibly shaken, her eyes swollen from tears. In contrast, Tom projected calm control, appearing firm, decisive, even cold. To the outside world, it looked as though he had orchestrated everything, while Nicole struggled to make sense of the wreckage. The timing was cruel. Nicole was at the height of her career, earning accolades and Oscar buzz, yet her personal life had collapsed overnight. "I thought our marriage would last forever," she told one interviewer, her voice breaking. But forever had ended in a matter of days. The divorce wasn't just a separation of two people, it was the dismantling of an entire identity. Nicole had been part of Tom and Nicole, Hollywood's most envied power couple. Now she stood alone, stripped of certainty, surrounded by whispers she couldn't silence. And worse, she was about to face a loss even more painful than her marriage. If the divorce had left Nicole broken, what followed nearly destroyed her. In the legal aftermath, Tom was granted primary custody of their two adopted children, Isabella and Connor. For Nicole, it was a wound deeper than any betrayal. She had poured her heart into motherhood after her miscarriage, finding salvation in the role of mom. To have her children suddenly slip from her arms was a cruelty she could scarcely process. Almost overnight, her relationship with Isabella and Connor shifted. They remained with Tom, immersed in his world and, more crucially, within the close grasp of Scientology. Nicole's hesitancy toward the church, once a source of quiet tension, now became a wall between her and her children. Those within Scientology allegedly branded her a suppressive person, a label that discouraged contact. Whether she liked it or not, she was being erased from her children's daily lives. Nicole tried to fight, but the odds were stacked against her. Tom's influence, his alignment with the church, and his dominance in Hollywood left her with little power. Friends recall her devastation, the endless nights of tears, her aching sense of helplessness. She was their mother, yet she was powerless to hold them close. The tabloids speculated endlessly, painting her as distant, even cold. But the truth was far more tragic. Nicole was grieving children who were still alive, but lost to her all the same. In interviews, she spoke carefully, rarely revealing the depth of her anguish. Once, she admitted, "They have made their choices to be with Tom. I have to respect that." Behind those restrained words lay a river of heartbreak. To the public, Nicole Kidman was an Oscar-winning actress, commanding the screen with elegance and power. But in her private world, she was a mother silenced, forced to watch her children drift further away. And that, more than the divorce itself, was the wound that would haunt her for years. In the aftermath of losing her marriage and her children, Nicole Kidman slipped into a darkness that few outside her closest circle ever truly saw. To the public, she still appeared poised, arriving at premieres, smiling for photographers, wearing the flawless gowns expected of a Hollywood star. But once the cameras disappeared, so did she. Nicole withdrew into herself, spending long stretches of time alone in her house, the silence almost unbearable. Friends described her as fragile, often breaking down in tears without warning. She struggled to eat, struggled to sleep, her once bright presence dimmed by a cloud of despair. Even her health was shaken, her weight plummeted, and her ethereal frame became another headline for tabloids eager to speculate on her meltdown. The truth was simpler and more devastating. Nicole was grieving. She had lost not only her husband but also her identity as a wife and mother. The two roles she had clung to most tightly had been ripped away in quick succession. Without them, she felt hollow, untethered. "I thought my whole life was gone," she admitted years later. During these years, She avoided Hollywood's endless social whirl. She declined parties, ignored invitations, and turned down roles she might have once pursued. Acting, the craft that had once saved her, felt like a burden she no longer had the strength to carry. For a time, Nicole contemplated leaving it all behind, retreating to Australia for good, abandoning the spotlight forever. But even in her darkest moments, something inside her refused to let go. A quiet resilience, born in her shy childhood and sharpened by tragedy, flickered beneath the grief. She wasn't ready to stand up again, not yet, but the foundation for her eventual return was slowly, painfully being laid, one lonely day at a time. As Nicole retreated into isolation, the whispers surrounding her absence grew louder. It wasn't just the divorce that had cut her off from her children. Many believed the real force pulling Isabella and Connor away was Scientology itself. Tom Cruise was the church's most visible ambassador, and the organization had always been wary of Nicole, who had resisted full involvement from the very beginning. Reports circulated that she was labeled a suppressive person, Scientology's term for anyone seen as a threat to its members. If true, it meant that her children, already immersed in the church, would be pressured to keep their distance from her. To Nicole, it felt as though an invisible wall had been built, one she could neither climb nor break. Overnight, she had gone from mother to outsider, her bond with her children severed by forces she couldn't control. Friends who watched her during this period described her devastation. Nicole rarely spoke about the church directly. Her words were cautious, her tone guarded, but her silence only fueled speculation. Insiders whispered that she had been deliberately edged out of her children's lives, that every phone call and every visit grew rarer until contact was nearly gone. To the world, it seemed unthinkable. A mother denied the simple act of raising her children. Yet in Hollywood, where power and influence can reshape entire lives, Nicole's story became a cautionary tale of how even a superstar could be rendered powerless. The pain lingered for decades. Even as Nicole later rebuilt her life, her absence from Isabella and Connor's milestones, school graduations, early adult years remained a quiet scar. In interviews, when pressed, she would smile faintly and say, "They've chosen their path, and I have to let them live it." But behind those calm words lay the truth. She had been erased from her own family, and the silence of her children was the cruelest punishment of all. For years after the divorce, Nicole kept her silence, letting tabloids spin endless narratives about what had gone wrong. She smiled through interviews, sidestepped the most painful questions, and buried her heartbreak beneath a polished exterior. But even the strongest facades eventually crack. In one rare moment of honesty, Nicole admitted the truth that had haunted her. "I got married too young. I thought I was happy until I was left." The words were simple, but the weight behind them was crushing. Spoken in a trembling voice, they revealed the vulnerability she had hidden from the world. She had been only 23 when she became Mrs. Tom Cruise, still more girl than woman, swept into a whirlwind of fame and power that she couldn't possibly control. Her confession resonated because it shattered the illusion. The Hollywood fairy tale had always been marketed as perfect, but Nicole's words exposed it as fragile, almost doomed from the start. The marriage that looked like a dream was, in her own eyes, a mistake born of youth and naivete. She had believed in forever, only to discover how quickly forever could vanish. That single sentence became a window into her suffering. Fans who had once envied her suddenly saw the cost of her life in the spotlight. She wasn't just a glamorous actress. She was a woman who had loved deeply, been abandoned brutally, and forced to start again with the whole world watching. For Nicole, speaking those words wasn't just cathartic, it was an act of defiance. It was her way of reclaiming a story that had always been told for her, of asserting that behind the headlines and speculation was a human being who had been broken, but who refused to stay broken. In the wake of her heartbreak, Nicole did what she had always done when life threatened to crush her. She turned to acting. The craft that once gave her refuge as a shy teenager now became her lifeline, a way to pour her grief and confusion into something tangible. And Hollywood, almost as if sensing her pain, responded with open arms. In 2002, she delivered the performance that redefined her career and perhaps her entire identity in The Hours. As Virginia Woolf, a tortured literary genius battling inner demons, Nicole buried herself in the role so completely that she was nearly unrecognizable. With a prosthetic nose, subdued body language, and eyes heavy with melancholy, she seemed to channel not just Woolf's despair, but her own. Critics marveled at the depth of her portrayal, calling it haunting, transformative, unforgettable. When her name was called at the Academy Awards that year, Nicole stood on stage holding the golden statue, her face a mask of both triumph and sorrow. She had become the first Australian actress to win an Oscar, proof that she was no longer defined by her marriage, no longer just Tom Cruise's former wife. She was Nicole Kidman, an artist at the peak of her power. And yet, the victory was bittersweet. Even as she basked in applause, Nicole admitted later that the night was hollow. "You don't want to be standing up there alone," she confessed. The absence of Tom, of her children, of the family she had once dreamed of, shadowed her brightest professional moment. It was the cruel irony of her life. The higher she soared on screen, the deeper her loneliness cut when the curtain fell. Her Oscar win was a triumph of resilience, a declaration that she could survive, even thrive, after devastation. But it was also a reminder that no award, no matter how golden, could mend a broken heart or fill the silence of children who no longer called her mother. Just when it seemed Nicole might resign herself to a life defined by work and solitude, fate introduced her to someone who would change the trajectory of her story. In 2005, at an event celebrating Australians in the entertainment industry, she met country music star Keith Urban. The connection was immediate, two global talents who, despite their fame, recognized something fragile and searching in each other. Keith was rugged, magnetic, with a charm that contrasted sharply with the controlled world Nicole had known with Tom. Where Tom embodied dominance and certainty, Keith carried an openness, even a vulnerability, that drew Nicole in. After years of being silenced in her marriage, she felt heard. After years of being overshadowed, she felt seen. Their romance unfolded with surprising speed. Within a year, they were married in a beautiful Sydney ceremony. Nicole radiant in lace, Keith visibly overwhelmed by emotion. To her friends, it seemed like a rebirth. Nicole, once so guarded, glowed again. She spoke openly about being madly in love, about finally finding the partner she had always longed for. But more than the fairy tale headlines, it was the intimacy that mattered. Keith made Nicole laugh, something she hadn't done freely in years. He celebrated her independence instead of stifling it. He gave her the one thing she thought she might never reclaim: hope. For a woman who had been abandoned, silenced, and estranged from her children, Keith's love felt like a second chance at life. Nicole herself described it as being saved, a word she did not use lightly. After years of enduring heartbreak, this new chapter promised the possibility of healing. What she could not have known then was that even this love, as powerful as it was, would be tested in ways that nearly shattered it before it had a chance to fully bloom. The honeymoon glow between Nicole and Keith did not last long before reality intruded. Just months after their wedding, Nicole was blindsided once again, this time not by abandonment, but by the darkness of addiction. Keith, who had long battled alcohol and substance abuse, relapsed. For Nicole, it was a nightmare déjà vu. The fairy tale she thought she had finally found threatened to collapse right beneath her feet. The headlines came swiftly. Tabloids screamed that Keith had entered rehab, that Nicole's new marriage was already unraveling. For someone who had endured public humiliation once before, the sting was unbearable. Yet instead of retreating, Nicole stood firm. She refused to abandon him. Friends remember her as steadfast, visiting him during treatment, quietly shielding him from the media storm, and insisting that love could overcome even this. But behind closed doors, the strain was immense. Nicole had dreamed of being rescued from her loneliness. Now she was the one doing the rescuing. She watched helplessly as Keith spiraled, torn between anger and heartbreak. "I thought I had lost him," she admitted years later, her voice trembling. At one point, their marriage teetered on the edge of collapse, the weight of his addiction pressing down on them both. What saved them wasn't perfection, it was grit. Nicole insisted Keith seek help, supported him through relapse after relapse, and chose again and again to fight for him when it would have been easier to walk away. For someone who had once been left without warning, the act of staying, of choosing loyalty in the face of chaos, became her redemption. Keith eventually credited Nicole with saving his life, calling her his guardian angel. But the truth is more complicated. Nicole's strength came at a cost. Once again, she was forced to carry the burden of another's demons, to put her own pain aside in order to hold together a love she couldn't bear to lose. It was another battle that left her scarred but unbroken proof that, even after everything, Nicole Kidman's quiet resilience was far stronger than anyone had ever imagined. Today, Nicole Kidman projects an image of serenity. She lives a quieter life in Nashville, with Keith Urban and their two daughters, Sunday Rose and Faith Margaret, far removed from the chaos of Hollywood's constant glare. She speaks often about the joy of raising her girls, about the gratitude she feels for finding stability after decades of upheaval. With Keith sober and thriving, their marriage has become a testament to resilience and forgiveness. From the outside, it looks as if Nicole has finally stepped into the peace she long deserved. But beneath the calm surface, one wound has never closed. Isabella and Connor, the children she once cradled as infants and devoted her youth to raising, remain distant. Tied closely to their father and to Scientology, they grew into adults with whom Nicole has had only fragments of contact. She attends their milestones sparingly, often absent from moments that most mothers take for granted. For a woman who once longed desperately to be a mother, that estrangement remains her quiet heartbreak. Nicole rarely speaks about them publicly. When pressed, she answers with grace, saying, "They are adults now. They make their own choices. My job is to love them." It's a carefully chosen line, designed to deflect gossip, but those who know her understand the ache that lingers behind the words. She has learned to live with absence, to carry on even while a part of her life remains unreachable. And yet, she doesn't allow that pain to define her anymore. Nicole pours herself into her daughters with Keith, into her craft, and into causes close to her heart. She has built a life that is fuller, softer, and more authentically hers than anything she knew during her years in Tom Cruise's shadow. But late at night, when the cameras are gone and the applause has faded, the thought of the children she lost still hovers like a shadow she cannot entirely escape. Looking back now, Nicole Kidman's story reads less like the glossy fairy tale of a Hollywood star and more like the survival tale of a woman who refused to be destroyed. From a shy Australian girl who dreamed in secret, to the wife trapped in the shadow of the world's biggest movie star, to the mother who watched her children slip away, every chapter of her life has been marked by triumph, tangled with heartbreak. Her career tells one side of the story. She has built a resume that spans daring art films and box office hits, collecting accolades from the Oscars to Emmys to Golden Globes. Directors revere her for her fearlessness, her willingness to step into darkness, to bleed on screen in a way few actresses dare. Audiences continue to be drawn not just to her beauty but to the raw humanity she brings to every role. Nicole has become more than a star. She is a benchmark of artistic integrity in an industry often obsessed with spectacle. But her personal legacy is even more profound. Nicole embodies resilience. She has endured betrayal, isolation, and loss on a scale few could survive. And yet, she emerged, not bitter, but gracious, using her pain to deepen her art, and her survival to inspire others. She built a second family, nurtured a marriage through its darkest storms, and created a space where she could finally live on her own terms. Still, when she smiles on the red carpet, there is a knowingness in her eyes, a subtle reminder that every shimmer of glamour has been paid for with scars no one can see. Her legacy is not only in the films she leaves behind, but in the silent message she carries, that behind every radiant smile may lie a story of loss, and that true strength is found not in avoiding heartbreak, but in enduring it and continuing to rise. For Nicole Kidman, the applause has never been the point. The real story, the one she never quite says aloud, is that survival itself is her greatest performance and her most unforgettable gift to the world.